All right, so I finally picked up a new telescope, and it's one that I've been waiting for a long time, the Celestron EdgeHD 8-inch. So, it's a big scope with a lot of potential, and I'm excited to pair it with my ASI174MM camera. The only problem? The weather has been terrible. It's been raining 2 or 3 times a week, and most nights have been completely clouded over, so I've barely had a chance to use this telescope yet. But that's what happens when you get new astrophotography gear, right? It always picks the best time to rain. So coming from refractors, this thing's definitely more involved. Refractors are pretty much plug and play, but with the EdgeHD, there are 2 things that make it a bit more of a challenge. Collimation, due to the SCT's reflector design, and guiding because of the much longer focal length. I'll get into both a little bit later, but let's start by taking a closer look at this. The EdgeHD8 is a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, also known as an SCT. It differs a bit, well, maybe a lot from my refractors, my go-to telescopes for over the past 3 years. Refractors are pretty straightforward. Light comes and goes straight through a series of lenses. The image quality ends up being great, but once you get into longer focal lengths at faster apertures, they get very expensive fast. Take this one. It hits 1,260 millimeters at f7, which is still shorter than the EdgeHD 8-inch with a reducer. It weighs a hefty 44 pounds, and it cost a whooping $20,000. Okay, $20,000. It's just not realistic for most of us. But in its defense, it is a stellar view who makes some of the best optics in the industry. Now, SCTs, like this EdgeHD8, use a folded light path with mirrors. It's how they keep the size manageable while offering a super long focal lengths. The EdgeHD 8-inch gives you 1,422 millimeters at f7, weighs 13 pounds, and costs around $1,700. Well, that's much more accessible than the $20,000 refractor. But again, I'm not going to beat up on that anymore. But what really makes this telescope special is its flexibility. And when I say flexibility, I mean that it's able to be so many different telescopes, and I've counted at least 4 instances here. So at its native focal length, 2,032 millimeters at f10, it's not exactly fast, and it's not exactly good for planetary imaging either, because it's only 2,032 millimeters, which is a little short. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not fast, so that wouldn't be good for deep sky imaging, but you still can get some globular clusters and maybe some close-ups of the moon. But when you drop in the 0.7x reducer, it becomes a 1422 millimeter f7 setup, and that just changes everything. f7 is a full stop faster than f10, and 1422 is an awesome focal length for galaxies like M51, M81, M101, and smaller nebula like the Cocoon or the Iris. And for planetary work, you can go the other direction. You just throw on a 2x or a 3x Barlow and push it to 4,000 millimeters or more. You then get an f20 or an f30 aperture ratio, which sounds crazy coming from deep sky photography, astrophotography, but planets are bright. Then there's the Starizona Hyperstar. Pop off the secondary mirror, install the Hyperstar lens, and now you're working at 406 millimeters at f2. That's insanely fast. A 7-minute exposure at f7 becomes just 2 minutes at f2 with the same amount of signal. You sacrifice the focal length, but for wide targets, of which there are a lot, it's totally worth it. Let's talk costs. The base telescope is $16.99, but if you do astrophotography, you know that you're not stopping there. The accessories you will need cost just about as much as the telescope. While you can probably omit some of these or buy a lower-end product or lower-end accessories, the cost will still be somewhere in the $800 plus in accessories. So for deep sky imaging, you're going to need the following accessories, assuming you already have a main imaging camera. Number 1, an off-axis guider. Price tag, $349. Number 2, an excellent guide camera, something like the ASI174MM, $499. 0.7x reducer. Price tag, $419. The Celestron Dew Shield. Price tag, $179. a dew heater, $50, and a T adapter, $50. All in, that's almost $1,550 just in accessories. That's just the hard costs, but let's talk about the challenges and the time it has taken me to get familiar with this. Collimation was probably the biggest learning curve for me. I've only used refractors up until now, so aligning mirrors was a whole new world. I made the mistake of swapping the factory collimation screws for Bob's knobs, which I thought would make collimation easier before I really understood what I was doing. That completely threw off the collimation. It took 2 nights to get it right again. I might actually go back to the factory screws if I can find them. But for now, I've got the Bob's knobs locked in tight, and I'm just going to keep tightening them. Then there's guiding. At 1422 millimeters or 2032 millimeters, there's almomost no room for error. You're working at very long focal lengths here. So I went with the Celestron Off-Axis Guider and the ASI174MM guide cam. It's not a cheap combo, but it works well with this scope. That said, because you have 2 different manufacturers for the guide camera and the prism, the square OAG prism and rectangular guide sensor do introduce some vignetting, I've noticed. But sometimes your guide stars fall right in that dim spot, in that little vignetted spot, and you have to rotate the guide cam to fix it. Also had to experiment with how far to insert the prism. Not too far that it blocks the main sensor, but low enough to actually pick up usable stars. If I had to make a choice at the end of the day, which one I wanted more, just a little spot on the top of my picture or more usable guide stars, I definitely go with the more usable guide stars. Backfocus was another challenge. You need exactly 105 millimeters with the reducer. My setup measured out to 102.5 millimeters, so I added a little 3 millimeter spacer to bring it to 105.5 millimeters. I definitely recommend calipers to get it right. Add that $30 accessory to your list if you're planning on buying this telescope and you don't already have it. So yeah, this telescope has a learning curve. It's not as simple as a refractor, and there's definitely some trial and error involved at first. But once everything's dialed in, this thing looks great, performs well, and can do just about anything. I'm really looking forward to getting more clear nights and finally putting it through its paces. I've got a long list of galaxies and nebula I want to shoot with this, although galaxy season is just about over. Maybe next year for that. But thanks for watching, and until next time, clear skies.